Live from London, this is BBC News. France's president says there could be a truce between Ukraine and Russia within weeks after talks with Donald Trump in the White House. Amanda Pritchard resigns as the chief executive of NHS England. She said it had been a privilege to lead the health service. The regulator Ofgem announces energy bills in the UK will see a higher than expected increase of 6.4%. The Vatican says the Pope rested well last night. He remains in a critical condition, battling double pneumonia. Syria's caretaker government hosts a national dialogue conference on the country's future policies, including plans to set up a transitional justice committee. And look up at the night sky this evening. All of the planets in the solar system will appear at the same time. It's what's known as a great planetary alignment. Hello, I'm Karen Giannoni. America's changing stance on the war in Ukraine has been highlighted at the United Nations, where its UN envoy voted twice alongside Russia. First, the two countries opposed a European drafted resolution condemning Moscow's actions and supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity. Then they backed a US resolution calling for an end to the conflict but containing no criticism of Russia. The Kremlin hailed what it called the US's balanced position on Ukraine. When it comes as the French President Emmanuel Macron says a truce between Ukraine and Russia could be agreed in the coming weeks after talks with President Trump in the White House at a time of strained US-Europe relations. He's the first European leader to visit since Trump's inauguration ahead of the arrival of the UK's Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer on Thursday. Meanwhile, in France, two people have been arrested in retaliation in relation to an arson attack on the Russian consulate in Marseille on Monday. Prosecutors called the pair major individuals. In Ukraine, air raid alerts have again sounded through the morning. The BBC's Joe Inwood has this report.
In northern Ukraine, new troops are still being trained, even as the war enters its fourth year. The cost has been huge, but this country appears to be holding on. It's done so through the effort of men like Evhen, who says Ukraine is making more of its own weapons and will continue to do so.
It's good to get help from abroad. Help won't last forever. It's here today, it might be gone tomorrow.
And that point has been brought home by the dramatic change in US policy. Once Ukraine's greatest ally, Donald Trump has started repeating Moscow lies about Kiev starting the war. And so yesterday's visit of French President Emmanuel Macron to the White House had extra significance.
Again, the relationship's been very special with France and very special with this gentleman on my right.
They've always got on well, but there were points of disagreement.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid. We paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
And that was not the only crack in the transatlantic alliance.
We need to reconfirm that the aggression should be condemned and discredited, not rewarded.
In an extraordinary development at the UN, European countries and the US found themselves backing different resolutions on Ukraine, with America on the same side as Russia, Belarus and North Korea. While in Kyiv, Ukraine's remaining allies took part in events to commemorate 3 years of war, and talks aimed at ensuring the sacrifices they've made will not have been in vain. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse gave more details about the reaction in Kyiv to those talks between Macron and Trump.
Well, we've had no specific reaction to a meeting between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump here. Instead, the focus has been on Ukraine's own rallying cry to its remaining allies as America throws the gauntlet down, really, challenges Europe to try and step up where it is less willing to do so. We're going to see Sir Keir Starmer follow suit, where he will visit Donald Trump in the White House to try and bridge a widening gap between Europe and America. So here, instead, we have seen a continuation, really, of military pledges, an announcement of new sanctions against Russia by the likes of the European Union, and I think it's a departure from the alignment we're seeing, certainly with the United Nations votes we've seen, with the softening of language from Washington. Here we are still seeing a country still at war, and its European allies trying to adopt a stronger stance as possible in the absence of America. But what's reflected, I think, by Emmanuel Macron and Sir Keir Starmer going to Washington is the fact that they still need America for a military assurance if fighting was to break out after a ceasefire was agreed here. But for now, it seems that more of Ukraine's closer allies are more willing to put boots on the ground, to send troops here to enforce some kind of ceasefire. At the moment, they're keen to stress it wouldn't be in a confrontational capacity, but there is no guarantee that fighting would not break out when you consider that Russia will continue, it looks like, to occupy a fifth of Ukraine, and that would involve a sizable military presence.
James Waterhouse. Let's return to that breaking news. In the last hour, we brought you the Chief Executive of England's National Health Service has announced her resignation after 3.5 years in the post. Amanda Pritchard shared her resignation letter to Health Secretary Wes Streeting on X. She said it was a hugely difficult decision to stand down, and that she said it had been an enormous privilege to lead the NHS in England through what has undoubtedly been the most difficult period in its history. Well, the UK's Health Secretary Wes Streeting has responded, saying Amanda Pritchard can be enormously proud of the leadership she's shown and decades of service she has given the NHS. She steered NHS England out of the pandemic during turbulent political waters and 6 Secretaries of State. She has led with integrity and unwavering commitment. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, explained more behind the decision.
Well, in her letter to the chair of NHS England and the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, she's made pretty clear that one reason is, apart from having done a huge amount in the last 3.5 years since she's been in post, the move towards NHS England being bound a bit closer to the Department of Health and Social Care, running health in England, has been something that's been happening, and I gather she felt because the two were moving closer together, it was time for her to stand back and let someone else to take on the role. Now, the politics of this are going right back to reforms in England under the Conservatives and the Coalition. Andrew Lansley as Health Secretary, NHS England was given basically a fair amount of autonomy to run the health service in England. Now, that changed under the last government with Matt Hancock as Secretary of State for Health, and Lord Stevens, Amanda Pritchard's predecessor, to bring them a bit closer together. It was felt, actually, it was not workable to have them so far apart. But it's now moving even closer, and quite probably Amanda Pritchard feels she's been working under the regime up until now. This is going to be a bit different. It's time to go. I'm told it's amicable, and those letters have been exchanged, and we'll just have to see who takes on this very important job in due course.
And in the meantime, Sir James Mackie, we're hearing, will take over as transition chief executive from the 1st of April. What has been said about him?
Well, he's a very experienced NHS senior manager. He runs the Major Health Trust in Newcastle upon Tyne, and he's also on the board of NHS England. He's been in charge of trying to direct elective recovery. That means cutting waiting lists, getting more operations done. So a very experienced pair of hands there to step in, because Amanda Pritchard, we're told, will leave at the end of March, early April, and then the search goes on. And I guess the important thing is whoever takes it on will need to know, really who is the boss. Is it Wes Streeting, the Secretary of State, and to what extent is there scope for the head of NHS England to direct the organisation? Of course, more than 1 million people employed in the health service, not directly by NHS England, but by many trusts and GP practices and so on. So it's a really important role. And the speculation now will be, could good candidates be put off because of a sense that the Secretary of State wants to really run the show? Or could it be that there's a happy medium to make it work? So A bit of a surprise that Amanda Pritchard's chosen to stand down very soon. She had a tough time at a Commons Select Committee recently with a lot of questions about NHS productivity and were the NHS making efficiency savings. But even so, I think a surprise that we've heard this news this morning.
Hugh Pym, the health editor. Domestic energy prices in the UK are going to rise by 6.4% in April under the regulator Ofgem's new cap. It's a higher than expected increase, adding more pressure on people's finances. It means a typical household will see their annual gas and electricity bill rise by £111 a year. The cap, which puts a limit on the amount that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy, affects the bills of 26 million homes in England, Wales and Scotland. Our business presenter Ben Boulos explains what the new price cap means for consumers.
The energy regulator Ofgem has announced that energy bills will be rising by almost 7%. The average household energy bill will be £1,849 a year from April the 1st. This represents a rise of £111 on the current level. That's a rise that's more than was expected, and it's the third increase we've seen in a row. Now, it's the unit price that is the most important thing. Those are rising to just over 27 pence a unit for electricity and 7 pence a unit, almost 7 pence a unit for gas. Those are actually the average cap maximums. It varies depending on where you live, but it's the unit price that's capped for gas and electricity, not the total bill. So if you use more than average, you will pay more for the total bill. These prices all come into effect from April the 1st and will be in place until the next price cap change at the start of July. The question is, what should you do if you're struggling?
What I would say to people who are worried about their bills, I mean, do contact your supplier. There is support available. The other thing I would say is that we've seen 4 million people move off the price cap in the last few months and go on to fixed deals. Those people are protected from today's increase because they will have fixed their prices. And there are offers on the market, there are fixed deals on the market at up to around £180 savings against the price cap. So I would urge people to talk to their supplier, look to see what fixed rates are available and look to see what help is available with your bills.
Why have prices for energy risen again? You may well be asking, given that we usually expect to see them fall in April. Milder weather means less demand for energy. But the wholesale costs for energy have been rising. Global pressures from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and a colder than expected winter across Europe have squeezed supply. That has driven up prices. Here's the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband.
This shows the dangers of our reliance on these fossil fuel markets, which are not in our control, but in the control of petrostates and dictators around the world. And it underlines the importance of our mission for clean homegrown power. So if you can have renewables and nuclear as the backbone of your electricity system, that means that we control what's happening to the prices.
And the government says it's proposing to extend the £150 warm home discount to 3 million more households on lower incomes to help with increased energy costs from next winter, not this winter. And it's just a proposal at this stage, not definite as the law would need to be changed. So there won't be any help paying these bills straight away beyond what is already in place. And remember, the government cut back the winter fuel payment, meaning 10 million pensioners who used to get it having to manage without this winter. Of course, that led to a backlash from pensioners and some charities.
Ben Boulos there, what it means with that price cap, a new price cap coming in April, 6.4% increase and higher bills. Now, just to let you know, we've been hearing from Kemi Badenoch, Conservative leader, in the last few minutes. In just over an hour, we're going to hear from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He will be making a common statement on defence and security issues at around 12:30 UK time. This is before he departs for a trip to visit President Trump, but he will be speaking about defence and security issues. Presumably, Ukraine will be one of the subjects he talks about. Now, the Vatican's latest medical update on Pope Francis says the pontiff rested well last night, but is still in a critical condition. The 88-year-old spent an 11th night in hospital. This is the hospital, the Gemelli Hospital in Rome, where he is being treated for double pneumonia. You may remember on Friday the 14th of February. He was admitted to hospital suffering from bronchitis, and after some scans, it was discovered that he now has pneumonia in both his lungs. They're outside the hospital, which is a very special place for popes because they have the Vatican has a special suite reserved for the Pope to be treated in. There is a statue of Pope John Paul II, who died 20 years ago this year. But Sarah Rainsford is our correspondent in Rome, and she gave me the update on what the Vatican is saying.
Yeah, the morning updates are normally very brief. This one particularly so, just one line saying that the Pope rested well all night. Now, that comes after a slightly more upbeat briefing and statement from the Vatican yesterday evening, in which they did talk about a slight improvement in the Pope's health, his condition, but all the while stressing that he remains in a critical condition, of course, with double pneumonia. What they did say, though, was that doctors had stressed that whilst he's still receiving oxygen, it is a slightly lower concentration. He's needing slightly less of that extra oxygen support. His laboratory tests are showing some improvement too. So very, very cautiously, slightly more positive, but whilst all the while saying, of course, that the Pope is very sick. He is 88. He was frail, of course, before this, and we did see in the days leading up to his hospitalization that he was really struggling for breath in those last few days before he went into hospital. You know, it was quite clear that he was sick, and then at the weekend he took a real turn for the worse. So a slight improvement since then, but still, I think, very cautious. And here actually at St. Peter's yesterday evening at 9 o'clock, it was the first time that the cardinals, a group of cardinals based here in Rome, came out and they led prayers. They said the rosary, a sequence of prayers for the health of the Pope. And there were several hundred people, priests and also Catholic believers who gathered on the cobblestones to follow those prayers and to pray for the health of Pope Francis. You can probably see behind me some of the pilgrims here. You know, this is a holy year for the Church. It's a Jubilee year. It's a year in which there are all sorts of events that have been planned. They are continuing, but of course without the Pope being able to take part. You know, this is a really important year for him. He had hoped to be right at the heart of those commemorations, but instead he's in hospital. And as I say, his condition is described still as critical.
Sarah Rainsford at the Vatican. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Syria's caretaker government is hosting a national dialogue conference to make recommendations on the country's future. 600 delegates from across the country are gathering in the capital, Damascus. The conference was one of the first pledges by Syria's new regime, who ended the authoritarian Assad family's decades-long rule in December. But critics are questioning the lack of minority representation and the weight this will ultimately hold in the transition to a new political system. The conference comes a day after European Union countries suspended a range of sanctions against Syria, including restrictions related to energy, banking, transport and reconstruction. Our Middle East correspondent Lina Sinjab has the latest from the conference.
People have been invited from different parts of Syria. Over 600 participants are taking place, including a big number of women representation and, Christians, Alawites of all spectrum of the Syrian society. The meetings today started with a statement, an address by the President Ahmed al-Shara, calling on people to work together for the safety of the country, for the prosperity of the country, and also stressed that the most important thing is establishing transitional justice, holding people who have war crimes as responsible and be prosecuted, but also stressed about the economy and, bringing this country up on its feet after, a decade of war and, corruption and destruction. So these are the issues that this meeting is going to discuss today: how to have, constitutional authority, what's the legal framework that, transitional justice is going to be applied within, but also what kind of state Syria is going to look like.
Lina Sinjab. More than 1,000 musicians are releasing a silent album to campaign against the British government's plans to change copyright laws, which could allow tech firms to train artificial intelligence models using real performers' voices. Artists including Annie Lennox, Kate Bush and Andrew Lloyd Webber back the campaign. They say the changes would reverse the principle of copyright law. The 12 tracks on the so-called silent album feature only studio noise in what the performers say music would sound like if their livelihoods are threatened. The British government says the UK's current arrangements for copyright and AI are stopping creative industries from realising their full potential. Ed Newton-Rex organised the album and is also the founder of Fairly Trained, a non-profit that certifies generative AI companies that respect creators' rights. He explained why he's against the proposed legislation.
Well, the problem is that the government has outlined a proposal on how to change copyright law to benefit AI companies. And this proposal would essentially hand the life's work of the UK's creators to AI companies for free to build AI models that would then compete with those creators. And so for, I think, obvious reasons, this is pretty unacceptable to people. The number of, the UK's very well-known creators coming out against the government's plans. I mean, the creative industries and creators around the country are totally unified in their opposition and their shock at these plans. And, it's very hard to find anyone in the creative industries who thinks it's a good idea. In the introduction to the consultation that the government put out and in various things they've said, the government has said there is some uncertainty around copyright law in the UK. That's not the case. Everyone agrees that training in this way is currently illegal in the UK. So really all that's required to protect creators is the government enforcing existing copyright law. The EU AI Act has introduced transparency requirements. They're very easy to implement because ultimately AI companies keep records of, I've worked at AI companies, right? They keep records of what they train on. You have to, otherwise you can't improve your models. And Baroness Kidron introduced some great amendments to the Data Use and Access Bill recently, which would simply make overseas AI companies, if they want to sell their models in the UK, adhere to UK law. So it's very easy to say, show us what your training data is, and you have to license that data as is currently UK law. It's really not tricky. There's a general misconception that perhaps this is legal in the US. The jury is very much out on that. There are more than 30 lawsuits outstanding on this question in the US. It is not definitively legal to train models that are being used every day. And already the first case of its nature on this question the other day, the ruling went against the AI company. So I think it would be very premature for the UK to say, look, let's have this broad copyright exception that favors AI companies, because we're worried other countries are kind of doing the same thing, when actually the US has a very fair and nuanced copyright law. And it makes it clear that AI companies and anyone who wants to copy work has to bear in mind the effect that will have on the work itself and the effect it will have on competition with that work.
Be sure to be looking skywards this week. You're in for a treat because all 7 of the other planets in our solar system are going to appear in the night sky at the same time. It's what's known as a great planetary alignment. This evening will be the best opportunity to see them all aligned before Saturn becomes more difficult to see. Rebecca Allen is an astronomer at Swinburne University. She told us what to expect.
Well, this year we've already been treated to several of the major planets in the night sky at the same time. And at the end of this week, we'll have an even rarer treat when Mercury joins the planet parade, meaning all 7 of the great planets will be visible in the night sky at the same time. Most of them actually even visible with the naked eye. So you will want to go out shortly after sunset because Saturn, Mercury, and Venus are all very close to the sun right now, while Jupiter and Mars are further to the east. And so to capture all of them in this short window, I really recommend going out just after sunset. In order to see all of the planets in the night sky at the same time is quite rare. We only see this kind of alignment once a decade or so, but to actually see them in the specific order they're in the night sky is more like something that would happen every 100 years or so. And furthermore, we actually don't have the full moon, including our view of any of the planets at the end of the week, so we actually have a dark sky as well. In most of the world will be able to see this unless you're at the very, very furthest north latitudes. You'll be able to be treated to this show. So again, you really want a clear view of the western horizon and try to go out just after sunset and try to see how many planets you can see. Of course, take your binoculars out for Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, but you should be able to spot Venus pretty quickly. And then from there, jump to the constellation Orion, where Jupiter will be hanging out near Betelgeuse and the bright star Aldebaran, and then you should be able to find Mars after that. So I really encourage everyone. It's a great family activity because hopefully the kiddos won't be in bed yet.
Rebecca Allen, the astronomer there, just looking at my app for the weather in London this evening. It is forecast to be clear skies, so perhaps you'll be in luck if you're in the London area, but not so much in other areas, unfortunately. Do stay with us on BBC News. Ben Thompson will be here with all the business news in a minute. I'm Cara Giannone here in London.